Welcome to a discussion of facts, of ideas that are vitally important to you as a human being here on earth. Now, isn't that interesting already that we're going to go into some subjects that are of great importance to you? Just consider for a bit the trivialities, the shallowness, the emptiness of the discussions and the activities that we engage in. Things that don't last very long. Things that have a meaning that vanish in a few seconds or a few minutes. Now, just now, we're going to go into things that you can take with you, that if you become very receptive to them, if you take them into your very innermost being, they begin to work for you, to do things for you in a way which perhaps you've never encountered before. You know, over a period of years of living, it is so easy to lose ideas, right ideas of what is important to you, what you really need, what you need that is essential, far more important than making a living here on earth, far more important than getting a few friends or getting a little excitement. Don't you sense deep down inside that just maybe, now come on, just maybe up to this point in your life you have missed something? Look around at your friends, look around at your relatives, look inside your own life, and maybe you'll begin to sense that indeed something is absent and you don't know how to fill that emptiness. We're going to find out in just the next few minutes. And when you take this with you, as I said before, you won't have to think about it as you usually do. All you'll have to do, listen to this truly magic word. All you'll have to do is welcome what you're going to hear. Welcome it in spite of all opposition from your own mind, which doesn't want to be displaced as the king of your life. Welcome it in spite of all the opposition of your habits, of your preferred ways. You do that, and you will indeed know what true spiritual inner magic is. You'll possess it yourself. Let's start off by thinking about the word doubt. Wouldn't you say that this is a world in which everyone is swirling around with great self-doubts? And even when they think they've found something solid and certain, it doesn't take very long for the whole thing to collapse, to fall right before them. How many hopes and plans and exciting ideas have you had for your life? You remember what it was? What was it? Marriage, a career, some exciting place you're going to go to, something you were going to do. Well, what is your situation right now as you were listening to me? Whatever happened to all those dreams that you had about being happy, about being fulfilled? You know, at the time, every one of the 1,000 hopes that you had looked like they were pretty solid. Every one of them gone. Now, I want to tell you something very serious. I want to tell you that if you continue to try to find yourself on solid ground with the old methods you have used, you will merely have to repeat in the future what you've had in the past. And I'll let you identify and clearly tell me what your present condition is based on your attempts to find something solid which have failed. Doubts. Wouldn't it be marvelous if there was a way, which there is, for you to get rid of every single doubt you have about yourself, of which you have hundreds and you know it. Wouldn't it be marvelous to find a way to clear out every uncertainty that you have in your life so you'll know what you're doing here on earth? You'll know why you go here and why you go there, because you'll be doing it consciously instead of in a state of psychic sleep, which you are now doing. Doubts. There was once a man who had a bundle of doubts. Am I speaking about you? There was once a man, there was once a woman who had a bundle of doubts, and he didn't know what to do with it. As you don't know what to do with your doubts. You haven't found the answer yet. So the first thing he decided to do with this bundle of doubts was to try to run away from it. So he did what an awful lot of people do, spending a lot of money doing it. He took trips. He traveled all over the world, and he went to the best nightclubs, and he went to the most famous restaurants. And he had what he called a good time. But do you know what happened when he got back to his hotel room? You know what happened. There was the bundle of doubts right on the table there. It'd come back to him. So he tried to do something else. He said, I know what I'll do. I'll take it out in the ocean and tie a weight to it and drop it down the bottom of the ocean. That's what he did. Took a heavy piece of steel, tied a rope to it, tied the other end to his bundle of doubts, took it out in the middle of the Atlantic, dropped it down to the ocean. And then it floated back, came up and floated back to him. See, you listening to this out there in this live audience, you reacted to that because you know it's true of your life. It always floats back, that bundle of anxieties, doesn't it? Doubts about yourself, doubts about where you're going and what you're supposed to be doing. So next he said, I'll try something else. So he went down to a religious place where there was lots of religious music and lots of religious action and lots of religious sites. And he took the bundle of doubts with him, of course, because he couldn't get rid of it. But he thought he went there often enough that the sights and sounds would begin to cover up the haunting doubts that he had inside the package that he carried with him. So he'd go down to this religious place several times a week, and he'd join in the activities that everyone else was doing. And you know what happened? For a while, he felt better. For a while, he said, hey, this is working. This is good. What he had done, of course, was to drown it out temporarily. And when he went home, there it was again. So all the actions down at this religious place did him no good at all. Have you ever tried to do something you thought was going to be successful and it failed? Have you ever noticed your state after that? When you've run out of places to hide? Haven't you ever noticed how your despair and your fear increases? You say, well, there's only one cave left to hide in. What if it fails me? This was the condition of the man. So he tried one more thing. He said, next I'll take it up in an airplane and drop it over the Amazon jungle. So he got an airplane, dropped it over the Amazon. It floated down the Amazon River, finally came back to him. He didn't get rid of his doubts because he was doing something. Let me ask you whether you were doing this. He was doing something as follows. It is called action without intelligence. It is called action without understanding. It is called action for the sake of creating a whir in the mind, a noise, a vibration, so that you don't have to hear, you don't have to see what you don't want to see about yourself. And let me tell you, as if you don't already suspect it, let me tell you that the world is hurtling forward with unintelligent, destructive action for the sake of action alone, and no wonder it is in the condition that it is in. But if you don't want to go along with the world in this destructive race down toward the swamp, if you don't want to do that, I've got some very good news for you. You can begin to slow down the action of your mind and of your feelings and of your total life. you can begin to slow it down so that you can see where you are going wrong. You can see very individually that as an individual, you must begin to go against the way the world works. When you're brought into this world, the world grabs you, it takes you, and does what it wants with you, and you don't know any better. Nobody does. Because the world is so fierce in its action without insight. And everybody, in their shallowness, praises movement. Political, religious, educational, social. In the family, let's do something. Let's go somewhere. Let's act. As if action is salvation, instead it is ruination. Where are you going to find one human being? Where are you going to find one man or woman who will say, just a minute? What are you talking about? Praising physical, mental, emotional movement as if it is a virtue in itself. I'll repeat the question, where are you going to find someone who will question it? Nobody wants to question it, because if they did, they would have to give up their foolishness. They would have to give up their pretense. And do you believe what I'm going to tell you next? They would have to give up their self-destructive hurtling downhill. The cry, the wail of the human mind is, give me something to do so that I won't have to think intelligently about what I'm doing. Give me something that has a lot of bells to it, a lot of trumpets, a lot of noise, a lot of headlines, a lot of racket. Now let me ask those of you right here now, watching and listening to this, would you have the courage to begin to slow down your life so that you can begin to question where you're going and what you're doing, so that eventually something would come to you that you could see as clearly as you can see the sky, clearly see that you have been moving along without any thought at all about where you're going? Haven't you noticed that when you go somewhere in this state of unconsciousness that we're talking about, haven't you noticed that you always arrive back at the same psychological place? Do you or do you not want to escape? Now, don't you kid yourself. Don't you give yourself an answer of yes until you know a whole lot more about the way your psychic system works, about how your mind operates. Anybody can nod their head and say, yes, I want to change myself. Anyone can say, yes, I want to be a different kind of a human being. Billions of people say it, and they all say the same. Nothing changes inwardly. They're just as unhappy as they were before, just as frustrated, and they're still carrying around that bundle of doubts. Did you carry it with you when you came into this room to hear this talk? You know you did. You listen to me, and you can find out how to get rid of it forever, once and for all, so that you don't go around with the same expression on your face, the same defeat, the same heavy spirit that all your friends and relatives and strangers do. Just watch sometime the faces of people as you pass them on the street. That ought to be very clear evidence to you that most human beings love their defeat. Try to take it away from them. I'll tell you a story about it. There was once an island called Prisoner's Island. And it was a little isolated piece of land way out in the middle of the ocean, much like Devil's Island that you probably read about in history books. And this island called Prisoner's Island was for prisoners who back in the homeland had broken the laws of the land and had been sent there as prisoners. And it was a pretty miserable place, isolated from the rest of the world. Surrounded, the buildings were surrounded, the prison itself was surrounded by a thick forest and nothing but reefs and shores all around it. And several hundred prisoners lived there who had been transported there because of breaking the law. And the warden of the prison was a man who reported regularly to his king back in the homeland. And the king wrote back to him certain instructions for taking care of the prisoners on the island. One day, the warden got a letter from the king, and when the warden read it, he was puzzled, delighted, had various numbers of reactions to it. But the letter was quite interesting. So he called all the prisoners together, all 500 or 600 of them, had them stand out in the yard, and he held up the letter and he said, "I have a letter here from the king, our king, and I want to summarize it by telling you what it's all about." And so he set the letter down on the table and began to give the facts of what the king had written to him, the warden. And here are the facts. The king said, "I'm going to provide," listen to this and apply it to your life. The king said, "I'm going to provide a way of escape off of this island back to civilization for anyone who wants it. I'm going to make escape legal. Any one of you prisoners," the warden went on, "who wants to escape the island can do so. But you must use your own ingenuity, your own self-resources to do so. If you can break out of your cell, climb over the wall, cut through the jungle, when you get to the edge of the jungle, when you get to the shore, there'll be boats waiting for anyone who reaches that far, and there'll be water, and there'll be food in the boats. All you have to do is get in and sail to the mainland, and you'll be considered free. No one will try to stop you." When the prisoners heard this, they threw their caps up in the air and cheered in great glee over the opportunity they had to escape. So the meeting broke up, and the prisoners immediately, you can imagine, in great excitement, began to talk to each other about the plans they would have for legally escaping the prison island. So they all went back to their cells and all began to talk about it and make their plans further. 3 weeks went by. The warden, who was very interested in this new development, called his chief assistant in his office one day after 3 weeks, and he asked him, "Well, what's happened? How many prisoners have escaped?" And the assistant said, "None have escaped." And the warden said, "Well, how many have tried to escape?" And the assistant said, "None have even tried to escape." And of course, the warden was baffled by this strange state of affairs. Who wouldn't want to escape prison? I wonder if you're following the lesson that I'm giving to you in the means of this story, by means of this story. So 6 weeks passed, same report. No prisoners had escaped, and no prisoners had even tried to escape. The warden began to worry about it. He was wondering if maybe he'd be rebuked by the king for perhaps not passing the instructions on properly or something. So he wrote his report back to the king and said, "I have to report, as strange as it sounds, that no one has tried to leave here in spite of the fact that the king himself, your majesty, said it was legal to try to escape. In fact, they would be helped to." Weeks passed. In those days, it was only by boat that messages could be delivered. Finally, the message came back from the king. And the warden read it, and he absorbed the following message. The king told him, "Warden, I knew what would happen, and what would happen is that nothing would happen. No one would try to escape. You see, I've been king for a long time, and I know how prisoners behave, but I knew you wouldn't believe me if I told you. So I had to give you the situation and let you see for yourself that they wouldn't make any attempt to get out of their miserable condition. See the parallel? First of all, look at some of them. Human beings are isolated. Human beings are isolated. Aren't you lonely? Of course you are. You're desperately lonely, and you have family, some of you, and you have friends, and you have activities. You have all kinds of things going, and look how lonely you are, how isolated you are in your own prisoner's island. Do you know what those prisoners were doing there instead of making plans to escape and actually making good their escape? Let me tell you about humanity, because we're talking about spiritual prisoners, prisoners of life, people are so habituated or so used to living in cells that they don't even want to try to get out of it. Let me tell you what they're doing instead of making intelligent plans for escape, for intelligent action. They're fighting over the advantage of an extra slice of bread at dinner. Quarreling with each other over the size of the cell, and jealous of another prisoner whose cell is 2 feet larger than their own. Do you understand? The whole world is competitive when it could be getting out of the whole business, of the whole mess. How many people do you know who will make a staunch, steadfast effort, including yourself, to accept the invitation to find the way out? How about yourself? Now look, why do you suppose we're talking about all this? Why are we bringing up such a fact that very few human prisoners in this life, in these cities and towns and countries, why do you suppose we're talking about the fact that very few people want to make the effort to break out, and that very few of them ever succeed breaking out of their old nature? Why do you suppose we're talking about that at all? I'll tell you why. Because bad news for your old nature is good news for your new nature. You see, evasion, think of the word evasion. Think of how you evade looking at your own conditions to understand clearly and once and for all that there's parts of you that with those prisoners have no intention of trying to find something else. They are perfectly happy in their imprisonment. They were given a chance to find the way out, and I want you to know, watching and listening now, I want you to know that you have been given a chance so far in what you've understood. You've been given an opportunity, first of all, to understand that there's a part of you that fights desperately against the opportunity to escape your own unhappiness. What you want, what you authentically want, is what you possess. If you are loaded with doubts about life, that is what you have preferred. Now look at it. Can't you see the simple logic in that? Anyone who wanted out of that prison on that prisoner's island could have used his intelligence to say, look where I am, squabbling over an extra slice of bread for dinner, when I could be out of here altogether, back on the mainland, back in freedom, living a truly happy life. You start right now investigating your own resistance to the truth that wants to set you free if you will simply accept it. See, it may be news to you that you have to learn how to receive instructions in breaking out. You think you already know. Worse than that. Millions upon millions of human beings on this earth think that they've already escaped, simply because they have religious talk, or because they have lots of money or lots of activities, simply because their mind is crowded with themselves and their own thoughts. will you start right now to understand that you don't understand? And you don't understand if you're unhappy. Who are you going to hide it from? You can hide it from the world out there. You can't hide it from yourself, can you? You live with yourself. You know exactly what it's like to go home and live with yourself. And it isn't very pleasant, is it? We've got good news here. We've got pleasant news here, which is make up your mind as best you can. You're not expected to do what you can't do. You're expected to do what you can do. And what you can do is listen and learn to the facts. Listen to the facts, to the details, which can get given exactly to you, step by step, of what you have to do in order to escape your own island of isolation and get back to where you're living a true life, which is also a very happy life.